Okay, I'm going to start this video by doing something that is trite, it's played out, it's become something of a cliche when it comes to modern political discourse, and I'm going to talk about George Orwell's book, 1984. Yeah. Back in 2017, there was a reported spike of sales in the book, which the media, of course, attributed to Donald Trump and his inability to tell the truth since being sworn in as president. Just as an aside, even if more people are buying George Orwell's 1984, a 2009 poll did say that it was one of the most popular books to lie about reading in order to impress people, with 42% of respondents saying they'd done just that. Now, I can only assume that the people buying the novel and the journalists writing about this spike in sales don't really understand the central premise of the book, because there is nothing as sinister and sophisticated coming out of the Trump administration when compared to that of Ingsoc. And I think it's safe to assume that somewhere over the passage of time, the message that 1984 wants to convey has been lost or forgotten when even someone as eminently well educated as Hillary Clinton also seems to misunderstand its message. She was on the record as saying last year, attempting to define reality is a core feature of authoritarianism. This is what the Soviets did when they erased political dissidents from historical photos. This is what happens in George Orwell's classic novel 1984, when a torturer holds up 4 fingers and delivers electric shocks until his prisoner sees 5 fingers as ordered. The goal is to make you question logic and reason and to sow mistrust towards exactly the people we need to rely on: our leaders, the press, experts who seek to guide public policy based on evidence, and ourselves. So, yeah, apparently the message of 1984 is to trust our political leaders, our privately owned media companies, and state-approved experts when it comes to the shaping of society. We just mustn't trust this current leader or any media that supports him or anyone he declares as an expert, though. But as soon as he's overthrown, we can implement the values that she believes Orwell was writing about. So it's a laughably absurd interpretation, but the message of the book isn't what we're going to talk about today. Instead, I want to focus on one of the book's central themes, the means through which Ingsoc governs, which is to control language, and with it the minds of all party members. You see, controlling language isn't just the ultimate form of censorship, limiting what people can and can't say at the root, but it also goes beyond that and becomes a form of thought control. What good are thoughts that can never be expressed, and what if we took away the words and meanings of words through which we could express them? Crucially, what if even private expressions of these forbidden terms and the ideas attached to them became a new type of criminal act dubbed thought crime, the penalty for which was death? Orwell not only understood the importance of language because he was a writer, but as someone who had stood up to totalitarian regimes, even fighting to overthrow them, he had seen how language is used to manipulate the populace, how propaganda can induce misplaced loyalty, and how fear of reprisals can be used to bring about obedience. The Ingsoc Party's approved language is Newspeak, which was created to help them maintain control over Oceania. Orwell himself described the purpose of the language as such when he wrote, "The purpose of Newspeak was not only to provide a medium of expression for the worldview and mental habits proper to the devotees of Ingsoc, but to make all other modes of thought impossible. Its vocabulary was so constructed as to give exact and often very subtle expression to every meaning that a party member could properly wish to express, while excluding all other meaning and also the possibility of arriving at them by indirect methods. This was done partly by the invention of new words, but chiefly by eliminating undesirable words and stripping such words as remained of unorthodox meanings, and so far as possible of all secondary meaning whatever." Does any of this sound familiar? If you've been paying attention since 2015, I think it should. The American political left, which has become irreparably infused with the divisive rhetoric of identity politics, have started to use intimidation tactics to control language. On college campuses, certain words and ideas carry the penalties of expulsion. Guest speakers with ideas that differ from the groupthink are physically attacked. Social media, an invention that should have been unifying and bringing us all together, is now policed by virtual mobs on both sides who will demand the ultimate penalties for the use of words or expression of ideas they find vulgar. The rise of hate crime, which sounds suspiciously like thought crime, has changed from being the physical assault or intimidation of a minority group into simply saying, I don't like group X, whoever that group might be, and it's being used to fine and imprison people in multiple countries around the world. People march in the streets not for free speech anymore, but for their elected officials to limit it. The only way to avoid the punishments meted out by any group who believes themselves imbued with the right level of purity to dispense them is to limit your language, to not express your ideas, and even go so far as to express thoughts that you do not believe, all in the hope you will be left alone. Understand as I do that these people are going to these extremes because they believe they are utterly right. They are well-intentioned idiots who think that the world's inequalities can only be corrected through extreme measures, and that once we've got a system in place that penalizes anyone who doesn't share what is the inarguably correct worldview, we'll be able to enjoy total freedom again, free speech, free thought, free expression, because no one will ever express a bad idea. Even if they cannot articulate this, it is this central idea, this central belief that makes the culture warriors so vitriolic in their hatred for anyone of a dissenting mindset. Of course, what they temporarily lose sight of in their zealotry is that by limiting language, ideas, and expression, you create the exact type of tyranny that they claim to be fighting against. That somewhere down the line, these same methods will be used to ostracize and remove yet another group of one-time allies as cultural norms shift. The better future they hope for can only be achieved through bad ideas being beaten by better ones, not the progenitors of bad ideas being beaten into submission, imprisoned, or killed. These means are effective and can guarantee your side victory, the proof of which is any reigning dictator throughout history, but the cost is not something anyone should be willing to pay just to win. The quest for linguistic control and the potency of the method is best encapsulated by the 1984 character Syme, who says, by 2050, earlier probably, all real knowledge of old speak will have disappeared. The whole literature of the past will have been destroyed. Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Byron. They'll exist only in newspeak versions, not merely changed into something different, but actually contradictory of what they used to be. Even the literature of the party will change. Even the slogans will change. How could you have a slogan like freedom is slavery when the concept of freedom has been abolished? The whole climate of thought will be different. In fact, there will be no thought as we understand it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness. Think now about the internet and the mimetic possibilities it affords us. How if you are internet savvy, we all have a shorthand through which to express ourselves and our ideas. From the acronyms and abbreviations we use on a daily basis to laughing at an image, not because of what the image shows, but because of the cultural references and abstractions attached to it. You can see why there's this continued wrestling match to control it. The 2016 election showed its influence, the embarrassment of a political party pressuring people to declare a cartoon frog racist, the false flags of the OK gesture being a symbol of white nationalism, the sudden resurgence in popularity for terms like cuckold. The candidates in 2016 were irrelevant, really, to large swathes of the internet. It was a means for two incompatible groups who had been on a collision course for years to fight it out, and the side that had all the advantages going in lost that battle. The past 2 years have just been a reaction to that. That side that lost doesn't want to lose again, and rather than fight around the calendar of elections, they are now scheduling another bout every news cycle. So let's talk about the NPC meme. You'll have seen it, and you'll either have laughed or you'll have become hysterical and felt attacked. Those seem to be the only two reactions to it. In the meme, a series of grey-faced humanoids, referred to by the gaming term non-player character, spit out generic talking points you would come across in media coverage about the current political landscape. The most recent study showed that the Trump administration has received 92% negative coverage across all mainstream media outlets. So as such, the NPC meme mocks that pretty much for the most part. From late-night TV hosts to news anchors, filtering all the way down to the average aspiring member of the so-called resistance on Twitter, you will often find that you must adopt a certain belief if you want to be seen as good. Whatever the talking point, you cannot deviate from a holistic thought process. You hate Trump, but you want to condemn Antifa? Well, that's too bad. You can't do that. Think the current administration is corrupt, but also recognize flaws within the Democratic Party? Unlucky for you, you're now a Nazi sympathizer. Woe betide it's something even more difficult to express, such as supporting protests against police brutality, but not supporting some of the Black Lives Matter movement's methods. And even as I say this, recording this video, I know I will be called a racist for that sentence. I know that clip will be linked by people to try and prove I'm a fascist. As an aside, proof of this came yesterday when I saw someone once again tweeting that awful cartoon of Karl Popper's Paradox of Tolerance. I pointed out that what the cartoon conveniently omits is that Popper also added, after outlining the paradox, he said, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies as long as we can counter them by rational argument and keep them in check by public opinion. Suppression would certainly be unwise. And for this, I was told I was rushing to the aid of Nazis rather than simply correcting a dangerous misrepresentation of a political idea. And that's what we have. Grey, uniform, homogeneous thought, devoid from critical thinking, devoid from context, and it's unfortunately becoming increasingly the norm in our politically divided times. Surely, though, a meme is just a meme, a bit of fun, a humorous way to draw attention to a potentially dangerous phenomenon. Well, you may have noticed that the extreme left do not like to be subject to mockery. After all, they're fighting for justice and equality and all that other stuff that they feel gives them carte blanche to employ the sort of tactics that they claim to be against. Fortunately for them, they're also overrepresented in the media, so you can imagine what came next. At the end of September, Twitter had brought in a new policy to supposedly combat dehumanizing speech, and this came after the platform was pressured from both sides. The left were telling them that the platform was a haven for all the Nazis they imagined into existence by simply changing what the term Nazi means, and Twitter were also pressured from the right politically because Twitter simply wanted to enact its right to remove anyone it wanted from the platform as an independent business, and people were saying, what are you removing conservatives for? Additionally, they were accused by Democrats of allowing the Russians to interfere with an election, so now to atone for that, they have to kind of interfere with the election themselves by removing certain accounts, particularly ones that might encourage people to vote Republican. It's just crazy, and in short, whoever they pander to, the other side is too powerful to be ignored. If they offend the Democrats, they get constant bad press that makes their share price plummet and upper management forced to resign. If they offend the Republicans who are in power right now, they probably get regulated into oblivion. It's an absolute fucking mess. But anyway, they brought in this new policy, and who can disagree with it? It's clear to me what dehumanizing speech means. It means don't use racist language to describe people. Do not call trans people it. It's about treating people with respect, acknowledging their humanity, and it's something that both political sides seem to have given up on at the moment. Yet those who felt mocked by the NPC meme quickly seized upon this. After all, if you're a non-player character in a video game, then you are by definition not human, and as such, those who apply this label to you are dehumanizing you. It's a very uncharitable interpretation, but that's what they decided to run with. Kotaku were naturally the first on the block, expressly spelling it out that this gentle mockery of groupthink was dehumanizing, proof that you lack empathy towards people who don't share your ideas, which is hilarious in itself when you think about what the origins of the meme actually are. And now, because journalists and people who work at tech companies all associate via Slack and Google groups and drink in the same cocktail bars, as we've seen in the past, mainstream publications were kind of pressured to pick this up, or certainly at least recommended to. Pressure had to be applied to not just those who were engaging in the mockery, but also the platforms that were allowing it to go unpunished. What the next wave of media did was something Kotaku didn't. It was to label everyone who was simply sharing this meme as far right, a term that obviously carries exclusively negative connotations. The New York Times was the most notable publication to pick up on it. This piece of writing is part reporting, but also, weirdly, it's part defense of the people mocked by the meme in the first place. Take, for example, this paragraph. The NPC meme fits neatly into this narrative and offers Mr. Trump's online supporters an easy shorthand way to paint liberals as humorless prudes who say drumpf because the HBO host John Oliver told them to, who march in protests and put on pink pussy hats because they're the popular things to do, and whose views can't withstand scrutiny. And then when progressives object to a meme that portrays them as unthinking automatons, it becomes another piece of evidence. See, the left can't take a joke. What the author doesn't seem to be able to acknowledge, and certainly doesn't acknowledge over the course of the piece, is that people like that actually do exist. And it's got to be said, what better way to show how imbued with humor you are than to use a linguistic loophole in a social media's company terms of service to stop people making fun of you at your expense. And that's what happened. 1,500 accounts were banned, and many others have been temporarily suspended for simply sharing NPC memes, and it's not clear where it's going to end or how far it's going to go or what the next wave of media coverage about this meme is going to look like. All we know is you mustn't call progressives NPCs. I saw a hysterical thread on Reset Era talking about how frightening the NPC meme was. What critics of the NPC meme have collectively overlooked, thus validating the meme's existence, is that it isn't a critique on a person's humanity at all, but rather of critical thinking. It pokes fun at, for example, how quickly people are to forget about things such as due process when it's a political opponent, while decrying the horrors of witch hunting when it's a political ally. A non-player character in a video game is a device through which the game's creators will deliver expository dialogue, assign quests, or help flesh out the world through tone. While an NPC in a game can never become a player, obviously a human being, someone with agency, does not have to go through the game of life as an NPC. However, what the meme taps into is the fact that too many people out there are all too content to sacrifice that potential agency in a desire to belong to the group, to show that they are on the right side of history, trademark, because they are terrified of what the alternative means. As such, much like the NPCs in games, they regurgitate the same sentences, phrases, and political outlooks that completely lack nuance. They assign hashtags to these pithy ideas so they can find like-minded individuals and congratulate each other on arriving at the correct conclusions, like faction-assigned NPCs do in role-playing games. Hashtag abolish ICE. Hashtag take a knee. Hashtag orange man bad. And let's also add that the meme itself, while primarily introduced to lampoon the groupthink of the hashtag resistance, equally applies to some Trump supporters and alt-right morons who also parrot the same stupid phrases without any broader context. But given the overwhelming bias in the mainstream media towards progressive thinking, leftist thinking, liberal thinking, whatever label you wish to apply to it. There is no need to allow a tool that can be used to ridicule both sides equally through, because they already have the approved tools to denigrate the right. It's better to reframe the meme, like many others before it, as dehumanizing, as hate speech, as proof you're alt-right, a misogynist, a racist, someone who could never be a part of the party. And there it is. Do you see now the parallels between this and what INGSOC were doing in 1984? It puts you in a position where you have to self-regulate, self-censor. They change the definitions of what is acceptable, and you must adapt to those changing definitions at all times or be punished. Now, if you want any evidence that this isn't actually about dehumanizing speech at all, just think about the personal favorite insult that the people the NPC meme is aimed at like to use: Russian bots. You must have noticed it on Twitter. Whenever anyone expresses support for Trump or the current administration, or at the very least expresses discontent with DNC beliefs, they are called Russian bots. It functions as the inverse of the NPC meme, tying into the handful of accounts that Russia funded during the election to sow discord among American voters. Because these exist, the thinking is that if you support the Republicans, you must be a Russian bot or influenced by one, because anyone capable of independent thought would want to solely embrace the so-called progressive ideals. And there were no complaints offered about this from anyone of note, and certainly no calls to ban this as dehumanizing, even though by the logic applied to the NPC meme, it of course is. But this isn't about making us treat each other better on both sides. It's simply about limiting language. One term is hate speech, another term is an accurate cautionary warning, yet both state at their most basic level, if you don't share my opinions, you are not a fully developed human being. Even media publications were happy to falsely label people Russian bots, as The Guardian did here. They were called out by WikiLeaks for doing so when they called two political commentators, one being a very well-known YouTuber from Syria who lives in Australia, Russian bots, and somehow being controlled by the Kremlin. Now, I know what some detractors are going to say. They're going to say it's just a bad reaction to a meme, that it doesn't show there's a concerted effort to control language in the realm of political discourse, that it's beyond a stretch to link all this to the principles outlined in 1984, that you've really missed the mark. And maybe that's true, but these linguistic contradictions and presentations aren't just stopping at how very obvious jokes are presented in the mainstream media. It's also starting to infect everyday language, eroding words and definitions we all understand and should agree upon, regardless of political persuasion. Ever since Trump won the election, we've seen what could be generously labeled as protests for every decision the administration wants to make, and even ones that only exist within the misrepresentations of the media. It must be said, most of these gatherings are peaceful, people exercising their right to free assembly that must not be impeded in many ways. I'm on board with a lot of these protesters articulating their disapproval of the political mainstream. Yet, there have been a significant minority that repeatedly go too far, that descend into intimidation, violence, and destruction of public property. And it seems to me, at least, a very easy thing to condemn, that violence has no place in political discourse, that people shouldn't be made to feel unsafe due to their support or allegiance to one party in a country that is a two-party system. With my cursory grasp of the English language, I would feel comfortable describing the groups of people who gather in anger to intimidate, harass, assault, or vandalize as a mob, regardless of what the politics under the hood actually is. And yet, I'm now being told this word is off limits, that it suddenly carries with it a partisan weight it never had before. CNN have led this charge, going so far as to intimate that using the word mob about those who want to see the Democrats in power shows fascist sympathies, and that it is the use of the word, not the actions of the people that it is applied to, that undermine democracy. You end up with strange moments on television like this.
Republicans, they're the team that needed the excitement, the passion, the energy. They didn't have it. In midterms, that's what matters for turnout, and now I think they do. And it's because I believe it's the overreaction of the left. When you see people like Ted Cruz getting chased out of restaurants by a mob.
You're not going to use the mob word here.
It's totally a mob. It is without a doubt. I mean, there's no other word for it. It's a go watch. Put up the video.
Mob,
of Ted.
Stop.
Put up the video.
A mob is what we saw in Charlottesville, Virginia, 2 August ago.
No,
a mob is not what we saw chasing. I'm not saying what they did was right.
What about the people who were at the Supreme Court banging on the walls? What do you call that? Civil protest? Or is that a mob? I think it's easily a mob.
Yeah, and if it were Tea Partiers, we'd call it a mob for sure. Come on, let's be serious.
Let me move past the M word, because I do feel like that is part of the weaponization of what's happening now on the right.
So we now live in a world where this isn't a mob, but this is a mob. It should be clear to anyone and everyone that both are mobs, that violence and intimidation towards people you've arbitrarily assigned labels to is wrong, regardless of who is doing it. Yet in the eyes and words of mainstream media, of the party, only one is a mob, because the word mob has a negative connotation. You could say it's dehumanizing, that a mob never has a validation for their behavior. In that case, then, how could it ever apply to their side? The word mob is now a linguistic trap through which to find who thinks correctly and who doesn't. And what it has specifically in common with the blanket coverage of the NPC meme is this: it seeks to strip away a valid criticism of one side's behavior by altering the definition so it can only apply to the side the media deems negative. If you use the word mob, if you use the NPC meme, it is a dog whistle, or just simply proof of your inner fascistic tendencies. And this is all proof, as if anyone needed, that language is power, especially when you connect it to shame.